Welcome to the Spirit-Led Podcast, your guide on a journey to full enlightenment in this beautiful life. I'm your host, Joan Hope Craig. Each episode we explore spiritual wisdom, life's purpose, and the profound impact of daily choices on our personal growth and the world. Welcome, Isha Das, to the Spirit-Led Podcast.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here and to be having the conversation with you.
Yeah, let me introduce you to our audience. So I'm going to start by explaining your name because I had questions about it. So Isha Das means servant of Christ.
Servant of Jesus, yes.
Servant of Jesus. And that name was given to you by Swami Nirvanananda.
Swami Nirvanananda, yes. Who will be doing the retreat with me this summer at CSA.
Yay. So we're going to hear more about that. But just to let people know some of your background, you're a teacher, you're a writer, a lecturer, a psychotherapist, and the spiritual director of the Assisi Institute in Rochester, New York.
Yes.
And yeah, you were formerly a pastoral administrator at the Church of Saints Peter and Paul, also in Rochester. And you have graduate degrees in religious studies and clinical psychology. Yeah. And you are a scholar. You've studied world religions, yoga, psychology, spirituality, and to relate to our audience, you were ordained by Roy Eugene Davis as a Kriya Yoga minister. So we're so excited to have you, and so much we could share about. But I think what I always like to hear from people first is I love to hear the story of how you got into yoga. What was going on in your life that brought you there?
That's a great question, and I kind of thought you might be starting there today. So let me put it in the context of my life a little bit. I was raised Catholic, went to Catholic grammar school, had a difficult childhood. My mother died when I was 12. I was, for a short period of time, literally homeless, ended up in a home for boys. And to make a long story short, when I was 16, I had dropped out of high school. A priest kind of dragged me to a retreat. And in the context of the retreat, I had an incredibly powerful experience. I was praying in my retreat room. I didn't hear a voice, but there was this internal sense of, if you give your life to me, it'll never be the same. So it was the beginning of my spiritual journey. And I'll kind of fast forward to how I got into yoga, and particularly Kriya Yoga. So, I was grounded in Catholic practices, etc. And I had actually many moments of grace, of presence, of transcendence, but I did not know how to stabilize it in my life. I knew if I, maybe had joined a monastery or something, that could happen, but although I didn't have this language at the time in my early 20s, I knew I was called to be a householder and wanted to be married. So I had a dream when I was probably 27 or 28. It was a very interesting dream. And I wasn't doing anything in the East at the time. There was a yogi sitting on the other side of the table. I can't tell you who he was. And there was a table between us, and there was a picture of Jesus on the table. And I said to him, I feel like I'm really supposed to follow you. It feels right, but I can't turn my back on my Christianity either. And he didn't say anything. He just smiled. That was the dream, but it obviously left an imprint on my psyche. And so probably a year or two after that, somebody, a fellow therapist, gave me a copy of the Autobiography of a Yogi and said, I just think you're supposed to read it. It's not my path, but it's a great book, and I respect him greatly, Paramahansa Yogananda, and you're supposed to read it. Well, I read it and kind of fell in love with Yogananda, fell in love with the whole Kriya tradition. I didn't feel like I had to choose between, my Christian roots and Kriya Yoga, and it just felt right. So I wanted to be initiated, and I checked out some of the other organizations, and it didn't quite feel right, to be honest with you. And I stumbled across a picture of Roy in a local bookstore, and he was going to be in Buffalo, New York, which is just an hour west of Rochester. I didn't go to it. But I filed it away, and then maybe a year after that, I looked Roy up on the internet, and went down and was initiated by Roy. And that was the beginning of my immersion really into Kriya Yoga. And what I really want to say, it has really taught me how to stabilize, these transcendental states, the sense of God's presence, however you want to say it. It has really taught me how to stabilize and go deeper and deeper and deeper. So that's sort of my background in a nutshell. One little funny thing I like to tell people is I really did think about being a Catholic priest and came close. And I'll tell a funny story with Roy with that. What I tell people is I could live without the money, but not the honey in this life. So, and when I was first initiated by Roy, I'm kind of a passionate person and I try to jump all in. And it was the day after the initiation, and I just met with him privately just for a few minutes. And I said, Roy, Yogananda really seemed to kind of favor people becoming, renunciates and swamis. And I said, so should I do that? And I'll never forget what he said to me. He said, don't go crazy. and I don't say that in a negative way. It was like, part of, I think, Roy's gift, among many gifts, is he was very grounded and very practical. And anyways, I brought that up to Roy. The last time I met with him was maybe a year before he left his body. He said, did I really say that to you? And I said, yes. I said, and it was great advice. I'm married to the most wonderful wife in the whole world, who helps me on the journey and works besides me. So you were meant to say that. Thank you.
You just gave us so many interesting gems that I'm loving your storytelling. I can do without the money, but not the honey. I remember that one. And when you were mentioning about Roy telling you don't go crazy, it sounds like the advice that Lahiri gave to his many disciples who were householders and who were like feeling the fire of that initial burn for Kriya Yoga, and they want to jump all in. And he's like, well, maybe you should keep your job, maybe you should have a paycheck. And so it's good advice. Not everyone is the path of the renunciate. And we can be renunciants as yogis and householders, right? Like we can renounce too much sensory input. We can renounce things that aren't healthy for us in a good way.
And absolutely. And one of the scriptures that I have really come to love is the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna was a householder and had a difficult job to do, but part of the whole message of the Gita, it's a profoundly deep, ever deepening kind of scripture. But one of the profound messages is that whatever you do, just do it for the love of God and be detached from the outcome. Don't do it for egoic purposes, but do it out of love and do it for God and for Guru and be detached from the outcome as a householder. And that's part of what continues to guide me, because I'm still a householder. I have 5 adult children and 4 grandchildren. And so I'm still a householder yogi.
Yeah, I love it. And I think many of our listeners are too, right? Yeah. I don't think that many of our listeners are monks and nuns who live in a cloistered environment. I think most of them are out living their lives, doing jobs and taking care of others and relating. I know we're going to talk a lot about this later too, but when you talk about you felt you didn't have to leave your Christianity behind, I would love for you to talk a little bit more about that, how you felt and how you see they interact, because I think that some people still do view yoga as like something they shouldn't explore. Maybe there's some hesitation. So could you speak about how they integrate for you?
Yeah, and let me just start at a really basic level. Many things we can say about Jesus, but one of the things is that he was a mystic. And what do I mean by a mystic? He was somebody who had the direct experience of God, the direct experience of God and cosmic consciousness. And so, in its purest and ideal form, Christianity is supposed to be a mystical path. And again, by mysticism, I'm not talking about, seeing visions and angels and all of that. It's that ever deepening sense of oneness with the divine, with pure consciousness. And that's really what he offered people and what he was trying to draw people in. So that's number one. And that's important because as I have studied the mystics of almost all religions, when they describe this experience of, I'll say transcendental consciousness, God consciousness, their descriptions become remarkably similar. Again, some of the language is culturally conditioned, but what they're describing in essence is the same experience. So I think what Jesus wanted to bring to the world, what he wanted to bring to Judaism, what he wanted to bring to his followers is the same thing that Krishna, for example, wanted to bring to his followers, what Roy wanted to bring to his people, what Yogananda wanted to bring. So there was a recognition of this underlying unity. And I'll tell you one of the key moments. It was in Rochester. This was many, many years ago. Some Tibetan monks came, and this is when I was just really beginning to explore things and integrate them. And they were building these mandalas and everything like that. And so I was there witnessing it. And there was just a moment when one of the Tibetan monks looked into my eyes, and we just stared at each other for a moment. I mean, it brings tears to my eyes to think about it. And I realized, yeah, we language things a lot differently, but we're drinking from the same well, from the same wellspring of love, life, truth, beauty, goodness, consciousness. So I really saw that we were brothers and sisters. And so, again, part of what attracted me to Kriya Yoga was there certainly was an openness to that integration. One did not have to choose one or the other. So what I tell people is, Kriya Yoga is not a religion. It's a path, and it's a pretty challenging and complete path, but it's a path that can be integrated in any authentic tradition if you understand your authentic tradition and if you understand what Kriya is really teaching. And the last point that I'll bring out, because I do get messages from sincere Christians saying, how do you bring these two together? You're a heretic and things like that. And putting it in a Christian context, I said, you're forgetting about the cosmic Christ, the universal Christ consciousness that Jesus embodied, but it's a universal consciousness. Yogananda sometimes referred to it as the Krishna consciousness. And if Jesus is who you say he is, then he's bigger than any one religion. He's bigger than any one church. And again, if you believe who he said he was, then why can't he be working in all religions? Why can't the Christ consciousness, the Krishna consciousness be present in all places and all time? So for me, it's really there's no division. There's no real conflict. What Roy taught, what Yogananda taught, it's leading to the same place that Jesus taught. And one more piece I'll add. As the world gets smaller and smaller, if we don't find our common ground, it's not boding well. We have to see that all human beings are drawing their life from the same source, regardless of what we call that source. And in that sense, we're all brothers and sisters.
I especially love your final point. And maybe for context, we'll share with the listeners that we're recording in January of 2025, when there's a lot going on in the world that does feel divisive on the surface. And I'm certainly trying to remember to see everything as God expressing in different forms, but it's, I can get off track sometimes. And so it's a good reminder.
Yeah, what I tell people in the Assisi Institute, and, it's not about being politically neutral or anything like that, but what I tell them is your first obligation is to see everyone, whether they're behaving or misbehaving, to see everyone as brother and sister. That has to be your first lens. And then what you do after that, it may differ, etc., but that has to be the lens, that as a starting point, everyone is brother and sister. Even if they are going down the wrong path, you still have to approach them as not an enemy, but as a brother and sister. And then when you speak the truth and they feel that you're coming from that place of love, it makes it easier for people to hear the truth if they're going to hear it.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. Well, you talked a little bit about mystical Christianity, and that really all authentic spiritual traditions have some
Yes.
mysticism in them, because there is a quality, a otherworldly quality, when we separate from the ego and experience those transcendent states. So, but I don't really know anything about mystical Christianity. Like, I know what Catholic Church is like, but what's it like to practice mystical Christianity?
Well, it's not unlike practicing Kriya Yoga. So maybe the best example I'll give, she was a 16th century Carmelite nun. She's a saint in the Catholic Church, Theresa of Avila. And in fact, Yogananda said at one point his two favorite Christian saints were Francis of Assisi, who was a mystic, and Theresa of Avila. But she wrote this wonderful book. In fact, I just taught a course on it, my wife and I did, called Interior Castle. And she takes you from that there's these seven, and think about seven chakras. It's very interesting that there's these seven levels. The soul's like an interior castle. And she says there's seven levels of soulfulness. And she starts out by the first level is just really what we would call egoic consciousness, where we're caught in the delusion of separateness, operating from the separate ego, and all that goes along with it. And then she just talks about this process of going into these higher and higher rooms, 7 rooms again. It's the 6th and 7th room that I think are the most powerful. And the 6th room, she says, you become, it's not engaged, but you become betrothed to God. And she says that there's really no going back at that point. You're still not at the 7th state, and I'll get to what that is. It's really cosmic consciousness. But she talks about the experiences of bliss and joy, but what she really underlines and underscores is prayerful meditation and practicing the silence and really nurturing that internal stillness where you let go of all of your concepts, you let go of all of your images. And she had a counterpart, a colleague of hers, St. John of the Cross. I love the way he said it, and it captures what she's talking about in this 6th mansion of this 7 mansions of this within the soul. And he says the prayer of the mystic is to stand naked and unprotected before God so that God might take possession of you. And she says that's what begins to happen in the 6th stage. And then she said you reach the 7th stage where there is no more distance between you and God. There is no more division. She calls it union, where you're in this state of union. And she really sums up a number of characteristics. There's no more fear of death, for example. Even if storms come, they quickly pass, and you return to that sense of peace. And you're just living for God, in God, with God, because of God. You're able to love people unconditionally. You're able to forgive people. It's just that, she breaks it down. This is what it looks like. So, but again, it's very similar to Kriya Yoga because, going back to the opening stanzas of Patanjali Sutras, it's about quieting the waves of the mind, the oscillations of the mind, practicing the yamas and niyamas, living a good moral life. And she says, it's good to read, but don't read too much. It's more important to pray and to meditate. So if you just read it, it's like, wow, it's everything that Yogananda taught, and it reflects everything that Roy taught. Again, she gets there by a little bit of a different language. And I'll tell you one thing that she got a little bit in trouble with and was questioned during the Inquisition. And I think this will sound somewhat familiar. She talked about the presence of Christ as just this universal presence. And she got called before the Spanish Inquisition. And luckily there was a Franciscan scholar who had studied Thomas Aquinas and came to her offense and said, no, she's talking about what Thomas Aquinas talked about this. It's just this universal presence of Christ. That is the Christ consciousness, the Krishna consciousness. That's a long answer. I'm sorry for that.
It was a great answer. And in fact, I'm so glad that we recorded it because I want to
Yeah.
hear it again. Because when you were talking about everything that St. Teresa said in the book, it sounded just like yoga,
Well,
to me.
what does yoga mean? It means union. What is
Yes.
mysticism? It's union.
Yes. It's, it reminds me, the listeners, and you probably knew Ron Lindon, who was,
Yes.
at
Yeah. Yeah.
CSA assisting for a long time. And I remember talking to him at one point. I remember he said about Kriya Yoga and specifically Roy's brand of Kriya Yoga, he said, well, you have to decide if you're okay with vanilla ice cream because what we teach is just plain and simple. It
Yes.
doesn't have chocolate flurry on top or strawberries or bananas or toppings or M&Ms. It's just the truth in this vanilla form. And what I think about all the different world religions and spirituality and faiths is that they're different flavors of ice cream,
Yes.
but it all comes down to the same ingredients, the same core.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that at first I wrestled with Roy's teachings a little bit, but then I came to really appreciate him. And I think it's in the context of what Ron said, that Roy Roy just gave you the pure essence of it and said, do it. And, virtually every time after a period of time, I would hear him speak. It was always the message. This is the pure essence. Do it. And over a period of time, I really came to appreciate that. I have an inquisitive mind. I'm sure I've never been diagnosed. I have attention deficit disorder. So I could get off and not they're bad tangents, but they're tangents. And it all comes back down to really simple day-to-day practice, etc. So, over time, I really came to appreciate deeply Roy's vanilla approach to things.
You've shared so many things that Roy taught you already, but I invite you now to share any other stories or lessons. It could be from Roy or from other mentors or teachings that really maybe they were moments in your life that really helped you or a turning point, something like that. Any lessons that stand out that you want to share and pass on?
Well, I'll tell you just a sweet kind of encounter we had, but it had a lot of depth. There's a couple of years where, again, when I was wrestling with certain things with Roy, and I never left Roy, I never left the path, but I kind of had a silent distance. And then some things happened that clarified them for me. And so I came back to Roy at CSA, and my wife would often come, and I would come for a week in the spring. And it was during one of these times. And so I sat down with Roy, and I apologized to him. I said, I got some bad advice and etc. And he was just so great and, forgiving. But what was so sweet, my wife, we were in the kitchen there at the main lodge, and my wife was in the temple there. And when we walked out to go back and meet my wife, he took me by the hand and held my hand as we went to greet my wife, and then gave us both a wonderful blessing. And I don't know, that might even be the most cherished memory that I have with Roy. It just said everything to me. Another experience was when he first gave me permission to teach, and I'll give a little background. I was actually running a Catholic church because there was a shortage of priests in Rochester, and they put me in charge. It was my boyhood church. It was an inner city church, and a priest would come in and do the sacraments, but I ran the parish, and I even shared the preaching duties with him. I signed the checks and everything, but I couldn't integrate Kriya. I was deep into Kriya Yoga, and I couldn't integrate it. And I prayed and prayed about it, and I just knew that I had to integrate these two things. I couldn't just be, do the Christian thing only. So about 3 weeks before my wife and I were scheduled to go down with Roy to spend a week, I gave my resignation into the Bishop of Rochester. He wasn't very happy with me, but I was listening to that internal voice that just, no, I got to do both. I got to bring these two streams together. It's like, that's, my calling in life in some way. So I hadn't had permission to teach with Roy, and my wife hadn't been initiated, so I couldn't initiate her. So I took her down to be initiated by Roy, and she was initiated by Roy. But there was an old timer that had been coming for years and years. I think he was from Missouri. His name was Robert. And all week he kept on bugging me. I mean, he literally bugging me. I think you're supposed to teach Kriya Yoga. Go talk to Roy. And I said, no, I'm not ready. You know, I'm not holy enough, whatever. But he really kept on bugging me. And so finally, just to get him off my back, I went to Roy and I said, you know, Roy, sometime in the far distant future, you know, can I teach Kriya Yoga? And it was very interesting. He went silent for about 2 minutes and just looked at me. And it was like, is he reading my soul? I mean, it was just, you know, it was one of those moments that I'll never forget. He just kind of stared right through me. And then he said, yes. I said, in the future? He said, no. When you go home, start. And he gave me some instructions along with it, some limitations, but that was the start of it. But it was just interesting when I followed the intuition that, no, I got to bring these two streams together, gave up this work that I did at the church that I actually loved at one level, that this other door opened through Roy. And, you know, one of the things I tell the people in the Assisi Institute who didn't know Roy in the flesh, one or two people went down to meet him. I just said, you know, you have to be eternally grateful to Roy because we wouldn't have the Assisi Institute if it wasn't for Roy. So that's just you know, and then a number of years later, he formally ordained me, etc. But those are two precious memories. The other one I will share is, it was about a year before he died, actually, he died on March 27th, if I recall correctly. And it was, I think, the March before that, I went down to see him. And I just felt like my ministry was really growing. The Assisi Institute was really growing. And I just felt like I needed one last blessing approval from Roy. It's, you know, I have by nature, actually a pretty rebellious nature, but there's a part of me that says, it has always said, I have to be faithful to those who have been my teachers. And I need to get their blessing to do whatever I do. I go there to balance a little bit of my rebellious nature. So it was very important. And actually, Swami Nirvanananda, really, when I said that to him, he said, yes, go. I mean, he was like, go, you must go. Swami is one of the people I have given formal permission if I'm messing up that he can correct me. And so he said, yes, go. So I went. And it was just it was a wonderful time. Roy took me into a chalet, and my favorite moments individually and collectively with Roy was when he told stories, you know, and he was telling me stories about Yogananda, telling me stories about St. Lin and some of his brother disciples. And I just would go into ecstasy when he would tell these stories. I mean, literally, I'm telling you, I was like, you can tell them 24 hours a day. I would just sit in those stories. And anyway, so at the end, I said, you know, I do things a little bit differently. And is it okay with you? And then he said, yes, absolutely. He said, it's working, right? And I said, yes. He said, well, continue doing it. But then it was the last piece. And it was very sweet. He was getting up. We were getting up to leave. He said, let me tell you one more story. He said it was just a day or two before Yogananda left the body. Oliver Black, who was one of Yogananda's direct disciples and had a organization in Michigan, he said Yogananda got a call from Oliver Black, again, just a day or two before Yogananda left the body. And Oliver Black was starting his own organization. And Yogananda was very thrilled. He goes, oh, it's not in competition with us. It serves everything that we do. And Yogananda was very happy about it. And that was the last story. It was the last thing that Roy said to me. And so I take that blessing seriously. And it's really become part of the fabric of who I am. And let me just bring this full circle back to CSA. I was thrilled and humbled all at the same time when Marty asked me to come with Swami Nirvanananda, and I was thrilled because CSA, there are two places that I call my spiritual home. One of them is in Assisi, Italy, actually, and it's a whole nother story another time. But the other one is CSA. It's my spiritual home. And they both represent, one my foot into mystical Christianity and the other one my foot into Kriya Yoga. So I was thrilled and honored and humbled when Marty asked me to teach this summer, because there's nothing I would rather do than to honor Roy in that way and be as much of a conduit as I possibly can be for CSA and Roy's ministry. So I'm thrilled to be coming this summer to tie it all together.
I love how you tied it together. And I love that you shared how Roy taught you, which is through stories, through
Yes.
action, through presence. He was just present with you, holding your
Yes.
hand or being silent with you.
Yes.
And it's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. That's one of my goals, my personal goals with the podcast, is to record as many stories about Roy as we can.
And let me just share, other ways. And I'm sure many people who knew Roy in the body would, I would send him emails with long philosophical questions. And sometimes he would not respond at all. And I took that as he didn't like my question. And so I would have to re-examine my question. And often it would be, yes, no, you're heading in the right direction, or you're not. And again, I really appreciated that simplicity, because my mind will naturally complicate everything. So I cherish those. But there was one that was really, I'll share, is in my morning meditation. I don't know what happened, but I felt, Roy they would have the early meditations every day at CSA, and Roy was there most of the time. And one morning in my private meditation, I literally felt like I was there. The smells, everything. I just felt like I was there at CSA meditating with everybody and with Roy. So I wrote him an email, but I was very cautious, because, if you presented extraordinary experiences to Roy, you had to buckle up a little bit. And so I shared, I said, no, I'm not saying I was literally there, Roy. I'm just saying I felt like I was there. And he surprised me. He wrote back and said, you probably were there. It was like, oh. So anyways, I love that story. He caught me by surprise.
Right. You thought he would say, well, don't put too much weight in this. It was just your mind phenomena or whatever.
No, he said, you probably were here, is what he said. He's like, oh.
I want to share that I've heard that. And I actually did correspond with Roy a few times as well. So you're not alone in the short responses, no matter how long the email that you sent. And also, Michael Gadway was on with us last year, and he said Roy would tell him, don't get goofy on me.
Yes.
And so it sounds like what he said, don't go crazy to you. So very grounding.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
let me just say one other thing about Roy. I was there for the retreat in September that Marty and his wife gave, and it was a wonderful retreat. And I just want to say I'm very impressed with Marty, and I'm very encouraged about the future of CSA. So when I was there in September, what I realized, and there were a lot of people who had been with Roy over the years, it took my appreciation for the impact that Roy has had on so many people. It was really clear, and this is the term I'd like to use, that he had become a spiritual father to so many people, and has had such a deep impact on the lives of people. I mean, I knew me, I knew a few other people, but it really gave me a really deepening appreciation for the impact that he had. And he really was a spiritual father to many, and still is.
Yes. I mean, for me, I went to CSA for the first time in 2005, so 20 years ago this year, and it's changed my life.
Yes.
I mean, I often look at Roy's picture and I just say, I'm still here.
Yes.
I'm still doing it. I'm trying.
Yes.
Well, you mentioned Swami Nirvanananda, and I have him on my list, so I'm going to bring him on too, I hope. But could you talk a little bit about your relationship with him, and then also maybe lead into the retreat and how you will facilitate that together?
What I tell people is that Swami Nirvanananda is my dearest, dearest, dearest spiritual brother. next to my wife, I think he's the human being I am closest to. Let me just say where we met, and it connects to Roy. I can't remember what year it was, 2008, maybe something around there. There was a CSA convention in Atlanta, Georgia. And I went there, and that's where I met Swami. We met in the swimming pool, and he was wearing orange swimming trunks as a Swami. And we just shared our whole experience. He's an Italian citizen. And so all that we had in common in terms of Roy, Yogananda, Kriya Yoga, but also St. Francis of Assisi. So we just instantly became spiritual brothers. And a little bit of background on him is that one of his ministries is that he goes all over Europe, and he comes to the United States and for 3 months during the summer. And he raises money and supports a school for children of lepers in India, Puri, India. And I mean, the school has really grown. They have a home for girls that they've taken off the streets. So he's somebody that not only has the experience of higher states of consciousness, but really lives them and really spends his life in service of others. And again, he is my dearest spiritual brother. And as I said earlier, I have given him formal permission to correct me if he thought I needed it. He married my wife and I in Assisi, Italy. So again, he's my dearest spiritual brother. And he is very devotional, but he really combines two wonderful qualities, that the joy. He really has a consistent sense of joy. And I've been with him in fact, I'll be with him in India in a week. We're going to go to the Kumbh Mela together there. So I've been with him in a lot of situations. And like Roy, he's ever the same. And part of his unique gift is he's such a man of joy. And his singing, when he opens, he's a great musician, don't misunderstand me. But when he opens his mouth and what comes out of him, it doesn't come from him, it comes through him in his chanting. So I just think he is a very special light in the world and really represents the Kriya tradition well. And we're very similar. He brings mystical Christianity together. So I think the people this summer are really going to love him. And it's always a grace to be in his presence. He comes to the Assisi Institute every summer, and he usually spends a couple of weeks with my wife and I at our home. And it's, again, he is my dearest spiritual brother.
So what will it be like during the week of the retreat?
Yeah, the theme is healing and how Kriya Yoga helps to heal us body, mind, and spirit so that we can be stabilized in our experience of God. So we're going to be going through, again, all the ways that, one of the things that I think is remarkable about Kriya Yoga, what I say to people is that we don't go to God as angels. We go to God as human beings. And we're also divine, but we have a human nervous system that is uniquely constructed. And it allows us as human beings in the body to experience higher states of consciousness. So part of what Kriya Yoga does is it purifies the body. The Kriya technique purifies the chakras, it purifies the body. And it really helps our nervous system to function at a peak level that then allows, our astral body to be open to all the lights and prana and life force, so that it helps to heal our bodies. And it's not just a technique, it's the whole lifestyle. It's a healthy, holistic lifestyle. Secondly, the Kriya technique really does transform the brain and the neural pathways. Marty talked a lot about that at the retreat this past September. So I want to talk about how the spiritual path doesn't bypass our humanity, but how it heals our humanity, in a sense, divinizes our humanity and makes us more fit instruments for higher states of consciousness. Again, if I go back to Roy, not that I, was with him in his day-to-day life, but I certainly got the impression that he lived a very balanced life. He certainly lived a very moral life. He lived a very spiritual life. He was a householder. That when we embrace the entirety of the Kriya path, it heals us on every level. and even allows us to be healed of trauma. It helps us to release the trauma. So we're going to be talking about Kriya Yoga as a path to healing. And Swami and I think we'll both, alternate giving the talks. And Swami will be leading us in meditation with his chanting. We don't have this schedule exactly, but we'll probably have every night, we'll have a kirtan with Swami. And so it's going to be, I think it'll be deep. It'll be fun. I like to make people laugh when we, as I think laughing is actually a spiritual practice. And it'll be joyous and with Swami. So I think it's going to be a wonderful experience for us, and I think for anybody that participates. So I want to encourage them to if at all possible, to come to the week in July.
Yes, and we'll make sure to put the link in the notes so people can find it easily. And I was just sharing with my last guest that I want to be there all summer, so I'm going to figure out how I can at least drop in, because every retreat.
We'd love to have you.
Yeah, this summer, but all the retreats are very are calling me. I want to be there, so
Yeah.
I may have to figure that out. But well, I wanted to ask you if there's anything else that you want to share with us today, and today doesn't have to be your last visit on the podcast. We'll be happy to have you anytime. But is there anything that you'd like to share with us?
The path is really simple. There was a Yogananda said, and St. Francis of Assisi had a parallel quote. Yogananda says, God is simple, everything else is complex. And Francis of Assisi said, if something is complex, complicated, then God isn't in it. So the spiritual path in general, and Kriya specifically, it's profound, but it is simple. It is meditating. It is following the teachings of the gurus, slowly but surely integrating them into our life. It is making room for the silence. And it is recognizing that, Roy's line is that we are individual units of cosmic consciousness. It is realizing that we are, at our deepest level, divine, and living our lives in a self-respecting way that honors our divinity, that makes our divinity grow. And then it's about honoring the divinity of everyone and everything, and bowing to the presence of the divine at all times and all people. So it's really simple. I know Roy was a jnana yogi of wisdom, but what always moved me, and I think this is important, so this is my second point. Whenever he talked about his relationship with Yogananda, you could feel his love for Yogananda. You could feel his devotion. So we all have different personalities and so forth, but it is following the teachings in a simple way. And then it is learning to love the teachings, to love our gurus, to love ourselves, and to love all of creation, because God didn't create the world, God became the world, and the divine presence permeates everything and everyone. If we can just keep that in our awareness, in the front of our minds and our hearts, then everything really does unfold perfectly. And I'll close with one last story that Roy shared with me. I know he shared this with many people. I think it was his last meeting with Yogananda, and it was in an elevator, I think. And the elevator closed, and then it opened. And I'm going to paraphrase, but I think it's pretty close, that Yogananda said to him, Roy, you can go all the way in this life. Don't look to the left. Don't look to the right. Keep your eye on the goal. For me, that says it all.
Yes, I love hearing Roy say that. It's been recorded, him saying that, and those were Yogananda's last words to him. You can go all the way, or go all the way and you can do it. Something to that effect. And he told us that was the message.
Yes.
And his example. Well, this has been so delightful. I'm so honored and happy to connect today. And my practice is usually that I like my guests to have the last word. And I invite my guests to close the podcast with, it could be a prayer. You did just give us some beautiful last words, so you don't have to do another one. But if there's something that you would like to leave us with, maybe your personal way that you lead a prayer or something like that, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I'm going to quote Yogananda, and I often heard Roy quote this, and I'll close with the prayer. Read a little, meditate more, And think of God, and I'll paraphrase, not just with your head, but with your heart, your being, your soul, with your whole self. And that will bring you into the presence of God. And I'll paraphrase one of Yogananda's prayers. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, all the Kriya Gurus, saints and sages of all religions, may thy love shine forever on the sanctuary of our devotion, and may we be able to awaken thy love in all hearts. Om, peace, shanti, shanti, shanti. Amen. Namaste.
Thank you for tuning in to the Spirit-Led Podcast. Special thanks to our producer, Monty Craig. Please subscribe to catch upcoming episodes. For support in your awakening journey, visit our sponsor, the Center for Spiritual Awareness at csa-davis.org. We offer online group meditations, classes, and in-person retreats at our headquarters in Lakemont, Georgia. Once again, that's csa-davis.org. Until next time, remember your pure essence of being, an eternal relationship with the infinite.